It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. This week, we're going a little more psychological with our horror monster with 2014's The Babadook. This movie showed up one day from Australia and seemed to kind of take the horror community by storm. Now, of course, anything in the last 8 to 10 years that takes any corner of the horror community by storm is often met with fierce debate. I'm not here to comment on that. I'm not even sure if there was much debate around this, but I'm so damn tired of all the discourse online that turns ugly whenever new voices with different backgrounds journey into the world of horror films. So, you know what? Let's forget all about that and let's actually focus on the movie at hand here. The Babadook is the directorial debut of Aussie writer and actress Jennifer Kent. Now, Kent based this movie on a short film she made called Monster. She refers to that short as Baby Babadook, which is kind of cute. But she studied in drama school in the late 80s and early 90s, but she kind of lost her focus in acting by the end of the 90s and wanted to learn more about directing. So she decided to take a different path by simply reaching out to Danish director Lars von Trier to ask if she could assist in his new film Dogville so that she can basically learn from him. He agreed, and she learned from the experience that perhaps the most important lesson was to be stubborn in order for a director's vision to come to fruition. She got some TV work as a director and then focused on The Babadook, and she started writing the script in 2009 and wanted to explore all sorts of themes and concepts about motherhood. Kent was very well versed in the things that we like around these parts, 60s, 70s, and 80s horror. She used movies like John Carpenter's Halloween and The Thing, as well as The Shining, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Carnival of Souls as her primary influences when crafting this film. And you can really kind of see those things in this movie, particularly The Shining and Carnival of Souls, of those that I mentioned there. But the movie would go on to win the Australian version of the Oscars for Best Film, Best Director, and Best Original Screenplay, with the latter two going directly to Kent. So not too bad for her first time out as a director. But without further ado, I think we should get into this movie and circle back around to some of those themes and interesting connections the film has made, including to the LGBTQ community in the years since its release. Now, the movie starts with Amelia Vanek, played by Essie Davis, having a nightmare of when her husband Oscar was killed in a car accident while driving her to the hospital while she was while she was in labor, giving birth to their son Sam. Now, Sam wakes her up from this nightmare, saying that he had a dream about a monster yet again. So it seems like this has been kind of going on for a little while, but he later says, after she kind of talks him down a little bit, that he'll smash the monster's head if he comes again for him. Now, Amelia works as a nurse at a nursing home, and Sam is also a bit of a misbehaving child. He gets in trouble at school a lot. Turns out that he builds weapons to battle his monster, and took one of those weapons to school, which was then discovered, and he got into some pretty significant trouble, even so far as being on the verge of expulsion. Now, Sam's constant erratic behavior and Amelia's constant exhaustion is noticeable to just about everyone around them, but Amelia tries to soldier on, and another night comes and another check of the closets and under the bed for a monster, and this night, Sam asks for his mom to read this different book, a pop-up book called Mr. Babadook. And the story bothers Amelia, but Sam insists that she finish the story. But as she continues the book, the more disturbing it becomes until she has to stop reading it. After he goes to bed, she decides to read on. And once she gets to the most worrisome part about the Babadook removing his disguise and making anyone who sees wish they were dead, she discovers that the book finishes out with multiple empty pages. Now, despite being told not to, Sam continues to talk about the Babadook and even scares his cousin with talk of it, of the creature. Now, soon, things get even stranger, where mysterious noises, opening and closing doors, glass showing up in Amelia's food, and Sam's wardrobe falling over as he screams, "Don't let it in," over and over. But eventually, Amelia, fed up with all this Babadook talk, destroys the book and throws it in the garbage. At his cousin's birthday party, Amelia is treated differently by her sister's socialite friends who treat her almost like a pariah. Then everything comes to a head when her sister admits that she doesn't like being around Sam, as Sam's cousin tells him that he doesn't have a dad and that's kind of why he's weird. In retaliation, Sam pushes the little girl out of her treehouse and hurts her, forcing Amelia and Sam to ultimately leave the party. On the way home, Sam has an episode that looks like he's being attacked or seized by something invisible. And Amelia takes Sam to the doctor, and she's able to get some sedatives to help him sleep, hoping that that will also start to level Sam's behavior and, make him a little bit better behaved. But the next morning, Amelia wakes up well rested and happy to see that Sam has also slept through the night. However, there's a heavy knock on the door, and she finds the Babadook book waiting for her on the front step. New pages are now in the book, warning that if she denies his existence, he will only get stronger. It then shows her killing their dog, then Sam, and then herself. She then gets a phone call from someone saying the Babadook's famous lines, which is basically to say his own name. It says, "Babadook, Dook, Dook." Now, she goes to the police for protection, but she doesn't have proof of the book because after that phone call and after everything else that she's kind of seen in the book, she burned it. Now, she also sees the coat, top hat, and the claw-like gloves of the Babadook hanging on the coat rack behind the main desk there at the police station. Now, Amelia starts seeing things like a roach infestation, and the Babadook himself is in her neighbor's living room. That night, Amelia hears strange noises and sees the door to the bedroom open. Soon, the Babadook makes his first appearance and lunges for her. After staying up all night, she snaps at Sam when he asks her to make him something to eat. So Amelia's state of mind starts to deteriorate, and after she crashes her car, which comes during another episode in which she sees the Babadook once again, she catches Sam calling their neighbor relatively late at night. And in a fit of rage over his disobedience of calling the neighbor, she uses a butcher's knife to cut the phone line to prevent him from calling anyone else. And when it's time for bed, she forces Sam to take his sleeping pills despite him saying he doesn't feel very well. She then has a vision of Sam's body after being stabbed to death, only to realize that he's cowering from her while she's holding that same butcher knife. After seeing a vision of Oscar and realizing that his offer to return to her is only valid if she brings him their son, she becomes influenced by the Babadook. She kills their dog Bugsy by snapping its neck, very similarly to what was shown to her in the book, and then she attacks Sam and attempts to kill him. But he is able to evade her for a little while before he knocks her out and ties her up in the basement. Eventually, she is able to get free and does attempt to strangle Sam, but he breaks her out of the hold of the Babadook, and she starts spitting up this inky sludge that pretty much separates the monster from her. However, Sam remembers something from the story, and that is really important. You can't get rid of the Babadook, and sure enough, it attempts to attack Sam once again. It then forces Amelia to watch Oscar's death replay for her, and finally Amelia stands up to the Babadook, and her show of strength in the face of the creature causes it to run away for the basement in order for Amelia to lock the door behind him. After a couple of weeks, Sam and Amelia seem to have a better relationship. They are correct. The Babadook can't ever leave once he's come into their lives, so Amelia has to care for the creature in the basement by feeding him worms and dirt. she seems to be able to control it and has found peace with it being part of their lives forever. So let's get to the three things I like about 2014's The Babadook. First, I really like the fact that you just really don't see the Babadook all that much in this movie. In modern horror, it would be so easy to try to scare the audience with constant images of the Babadook creature scurrying up to the camera and shrieking at you. Yes, well, sometimes that can cause a jump scare or give you some uneasy feelings. It's not real and true horror. This movie's use of its setting and the performances and sound is far more atmospheric and unsettling than the constant looks at the monster's visage. By remaining reserved, the movie does more to leave the viewer in an elevated sense of dread. And second, and really kind of part of the first like and definitely tied to my third like for this movie, Essie Davis playing Amelia is sympathetic while still being terrifying. It's a really hard balance to strike, but in the end, really, the personification that is the monster is born out of her own deep-seated despair and sadness over losing her husband. She, being unable to find solace from what happened the night Sam was born, is creating the trouble in the house. And, if you think about that, she loses the love of her life while giving birth to their creation, all in the same span of time, like basically 24 hours. That is incredibly difficult for anybody to deal with, and oftentimes leads into real world scenarios in which the living parent ends up almost kind of hating the child, or at least holding the child responsible for the other parent's death in that sort of situation. But okay, so with that, we do need a performance from Davis that can show her as a mom who fiercely defends her son from the teachers at school that want to kind of other him for his behavior, while in about an hour's worth of runtime later may very well try to kill him. We have to feel her mother's love and then feel Sam's terror of being snapped at and attacked by the only person on this planet that he knows even likes him, let alone loves him. He's often told, or at least he often gets the impression during the course of of all the characters he interacts with, that really nobody likes him because he's quote unquote weird. So it's almost heartbreaking to see him have to cower from the only person that he wants to feel loved by or liked by. But Essie Davis has to carry a lot of this movie on her back by portraying both versions of Amelia, and her performance is also, we have to see that from Sam's perspective as well. But not only that, she also has to make us feel sorry for her as she is slowly descending into that madness by letting us feel just as exhausted as she is. Early on in this movie, I really felt like she was someone having to deal with problems that her kid has. But by the end of the movie, I realized that Sam is having problems because of issues that she refuses to do anything about. It's a great performance for us to ultimately see that while we progress through the story, and on top of all of that, the clues are there for us. We see that she sacrifices her sleep and her, comfort to kind of placate Sam's fear of monsters in his room. We know from very early on she has a toothache that she really needs to see a dentist to get fixed, but she won't go. It's almost like she can't even let go of this tooth that is giving her problems. She and her sister have shared birthday parties for their kids because it doesn't seem as though she wants to celebrate Sam's birthday on his actual birthday. But days and likely weeks in advance because of the fact that he was born on the day that she lost her husband. So going back through this a second time would likely uncover lots more clues that Amelia is ultimately going to become the real monster of the movie. But Davis is able to downplay that so much early on that we slowly go through the descent with her. And it's a really great performance. Now, kind of tied to that, and my third like for this movie is what's underneath everything, and that is that this movie is saturated in themes of depression, sorrow, and exactly how difficult motherhood can be, especially as a widow. Amelia is absolutely exhausted. And in fact, the color palette of their house is so drab. It's so sleepy. It's so depressing. You just feel terribly sad for her. She can't seem to sleep. She's barely able to get to work on time. She's unkempt and sounds crazy when she tries to get help from her sister or from the police. It's actually relatively harrowing because there are lots of single parents that struggle on the verge of being able to hold things together. To add to that, anything like difficulty sleeping, a misbehaving kid, a deep depression from loneliness, or even the fact that she is a widow. She doesn't have the father around, even if they were separated or divorced. Usually fathers will come and help out with the kid. And so all of that, it just makes it that much worse. Now, Jennifer Kent said that one of the things that is almost taboo to talk about that she drew from is the fact that motherhood isn't all that great all the time. It's extremely hard work. It's hard to carry on when the mother herself is dealing with her own issues, especially since we live in, at least in Western society, where single parents, it's usually going to be, unless the mother has passed away, or you were incredibly lucky to win the court case, most of the time, a child stays with a mother, and even when that is, even when the father is still around. So imagine not having the father around. It's incredibly difficult for that mother to be able to balance taking care of somebody else's well-being when she can't take care of her own. Most even will contend that the Babadook is a physical representation of grief itself, and most likely it's the shared grief that both Amelia and Sam share for the loss of Oscar, the father. Now, in addition, parents of autistic children have also found a great deal to identify with, as they say Sam displays traits of autism. And while Kent didn't exactly use that as inspiration or directly intend to go beyond the ideas of grief and single motherhood, this movie seems to find all sorts of inspiration and identity among various groups of people with different living situations. And none more surprising than when the Babadook's visage was adopted by the LGBTQ community during 2017 Pride Month celebrations. Members of the community believe that the Babadook to be kind of representative of the gay and queer communities due to his dress and dramatic mannerisms. And in addition, many in the LGBTQ community identify with the idea of their sexuality, which oftentimes presents an upsetting new dynamic in the typical family structure, just as the Babadook has upset the dynamics between Amelia and Sam that doesn't seem to have been present before his more recent struggles with sleep at the start of the movie. Again, Kent didn't intend for that connection to be drawn, but she loves the idea that another group of people can give the Babadook new life and meaning. In fact, oftentimes, this movie gets special packaging in and around Pride Month with rainbow designs and so forth. This is a terribly fascinating movie, and it's difficult really to necessarily recommend to a horror fan because it's a little bit more psychological and it doesn't really rely on the monster being the horror. I don't know if I'd necessarily be able to recommend it to all walks of life who like horror. Also, I'm not entirely sure I can recommend it to all walks of life because there is a depressing element to this movie. These two are in terrible despair and depression with what's going on around them. With Essie Davis's character never really dealing with the loss of her husband, her son being a constant reminder of the night that he died. It's a very difficult thing to be, to really recommend it to a wide audience. But if you're interested in seeing how this plays with themes, how it plays with a more classic style of horror without seeing the monster all that much, and you have an interest in delving into more psychological type of stuff like this, then I would definitely recommend it. Now that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. In just a few weeks in September, we will be back with brand new episodes of Film Seizure as well. You can always check out some of the best of episodes that we released throughout the summer while we were on our break. But don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure Podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube, where we upload the episodes there as well. So you can also check out my website, bmovieenema.com, to read new articles every Friday morning. When we come back next Monday, we're going back to Japan for some more Big G action, but this time we're going to look at the first of an animated trilogy from Toho that was released to Netflix a few years ago, Godzilla Planet of the Monsters. So until next week, stay spooky.